and welcome once again to Bookmark for a very special interview with author and radio host, Dr. Ray Guarendi. This time his new work is When Faith Causes Family Friction. Dr. Ray tackles the tough questions. Oh, there we go, Dr. Ray.
How are you?
You're always tackling something, taking on
very
the tough
manly
issue
word,
today,
tackling.
Taking on the culture today in a countercultural way. Wonderful radio show, wonderful television show, and you've been multiplying these books as well. How many books is it now?
12.
12 books.
Just to get with you.
Just to get, that's right. You write these books just so we can spend a little time chatting. And of course, your big bestseller was what? Discipline That Lasts a Lifetime? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And we were talking a little bit before the show. You think with total sales, you're well over 100,000 on all the books put together, at least.
Well, if you count the pages.
Right. Okay.
If you count the pages.
You count the pages.
100,000 pages.
Well, don't say that because there's not that many pages in here. That might scare people away. This is a much shorter book. But this talks about when faith causes family friction. And was this your idea? Was this something you came up and its servant who published it come up with it?
Last 15 years, I drifted more in my therapeutic practice towards Catholic folks. And as a result, you're going to get a lot of questions, therapeutic questions about, okay, Dr. Ray, my 13-year-old's refusing to go to Mass. Okay, Dr. Ray, I just drift off during the Rosary. Okay, Dr. Ray, my 22-year-old came home from college, says he's an atheist. Getting more and more of those. And I decided, let's put those together in a book. Let's deal with that stuff.
When you say you drifted into a Catholic practice, let's say mostly, was that, why did you do that? Was that a function of working in media and radio, your own personal conversion process?
I was trained as a secular psychologist.
Right. And you say that in the...
We were told, don't include religion or morality in your therapy. Take a neutral stance. Well, obviously, Doug, a neutral stance is a stance.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So as I got more involved with EWTN, Catholic media, and doing more in the Catholic world, I kind of got a reputation as here's a guy you can trust to respect your value system.
Were you responding to people coming to you basically
Yes.
then, and that kind of allowed you to move in that direction?
I do both. You know, somebody will say, well, what if somebody comes to you as not Catholic? Right. I say, well, I can still see them because God's truth is God's truth, and morality and good sense still applies.
Now, you make a point here. You talk about, though I practiced my Catholic faith back then, I would practice psychology as I was taught. Keep them separate, right, of course. And you say you drifted from the church, and you say this, God sees things the same way that I do. At least that's what you thought.
The new atheism.
Right.
That's right.
And that's what you see as being core, is that it's not that, it's that people may believe in God. It's not that they say there isn't necessarily God, but that whatever they kind of believe their will is telling them, that's the way God would think too.
There is a God, but he thinks just like me. And that is prominent in our culture, and I called it the new atheism.
Right. You also say the matters of faith and psychology routinely intersect. Are you seeing that more and more today?
Yes.
Okay, why?
Because if somebody comes into your office and they're miserable, they know something is wrong. Whether they point it to the fact that they don't have a moral grounding, some faith worldview or not, they know something is wrong. And many of them have like this residual religion left over that they've left. And they're thinking, well, maybe there was something to that. And a good therapist can ask about that. You're allowed in therapy to say, well, tell me a little bit about your religious upbringing. And then the gates open up.
Well, that's where all the Catholic guilt comes out, and obviously that's the core of what the problems are most of the time, no?
There is a lot of, the shrinks call it cognitive dissonance.
Okay, right.
You're trying to hold two ideas in your head at the same time. I'm living this libertine existence, and I want to leave my wife and 3 children for my new girlfriend's secretary. My mother's words, the Catholic priest's words are echoing in my ears and making me very uncomfortable.
Right, now, and I'm struggling to justify my new opinion.
By the way, Doug, one thing I've learned as a shrink, the length of justifications is nearly infinite.
Yes, exactly. One time in a particular movie, they said you can't go a day without one good, juicy rationalization to get through life. Section 1, this I thought was interesting in the light of psychology. Mass resistance, just because something is for our immeasurable benefit doesn't mean we'll want it. Now, the fact that your kids don't really want to go to Mass, and you talk about it in here because, you know, they don't understand it, so they don't understand the importance of it. An hour is a long time when you're younger, etc. But is that a psychological problem, or why is that in this book?
Because we are an entertainment culture. We are a video cocaine culture. Mm-hmm. Fast, move, more. And to the average 13, 14, 16-year-old, when father is doing something very reverent, it looks like this.
In slow motion.
Yeah, and they're going like this with the remote, like, pick him up.
That's right.
And
where's the DVR?
Yes.
Can't we go fast forward past
this part?
It is a huge
psychological effect. I call it the roller coaster effect. Roller coaster's got to get bigger and faster to give you the same rush. Same thing in our culture, and you're seeing more and more children in mass stand like pillars of salt. Mm-hmm. And so the parents struggle with this. How much do I require them to respond? How much do I make them go to Mass at age 17 when they're telling me, if you force me, I'm just going to reject religion as soon as I'm old enough?
Right. Sure. So what would you say to something? You said a television show once asked me to be a guest for this topic. Should parents force their values upon their children, or should they be free to choose their own? It didn't take a shrink to analyze the show's bias. What would be your bias in a sense of that? What would you say to that?
Parents force everything. We force them to eat right, we force them to do their schoolwork, we force them to treat their siblings right. So much of parenthood is social, moral, emotional force, if you want to put it in such crude terms. Why is it where the most important thing is involved, we become afraid? If I require this of my children, if I want their presence there, I'm risking the ultimate outcome. Parents are nervous about that. I always tell parents, you have a much greater chance of your children leaving the faith if you don't require them to be there against their will at times.
And that's statistically true.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Yeah, well, you say many of the fallen away proclaim, I was made to go to church as a kid, and as I got older, I wanted to decide for myself. And you want to say, I was made to is often the spoken rationale for the, I just don't want to go anymore.
The I don't want to is the preeminent, right. Rationale.
Right.
And we don't get down to that base level, but that's really true. Mm-hmm. We can say when I'm 34 years old and the way the church is asking me to live clashes with my desires, you know what it was? It was those nuns. It was those nuns that made us go to daily Mass. You know, my mother made me get up on Sundays, the only day I could sleep in. That's what it was. Right. Not the matter that I'm being forced to live in a way I don't want to live by a moral system.
Right, and I don't feel like getting up in the morning Sunday. I don't feel like getting dressed. That's my one day to rest and relax, etc. And this was interesting. You talk about one father who told his teens that they had to go to Mass, and he said he knew that at Mass something could somehow touch their souls. And that's sort of what's really important in the way parents live their life, I think, and also, EWTN, etc., which is you never know who's watching and when they're watching, and what is going to be said or seen that will touch somebody.
One thing is certain. If they're not there, nothing is going to happen.
Right, exactly. You talk about dependent independence. This was a question somebody talked about, the child who comes back from college where, age entitlement, blossoming autonomy incorporates a slew of so-called freedoms that are supposed to arrive just because a certain age does. And there seems to be, and isn't that what really gets promoted even at universities?
Well, yeah, Dad, I didn't go to Mass from about October on. And now I come home and I have to go to Mass. Now, what good is that going to do?
Right.
Okay, and I
just doing it for show for you and Mom,
The parent has to say, this is what we do. The verse, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. It's a statement. As a parent, you make a statement. You realize your statement may not lead to the ultimate outcome you want, but you're still making a statement. This is, in our home, the respect we show the Lord.
You said that college kids drift from Mass for a range of reasons. What would those range be?
Universities are heavily secular, hedonistic environment. I can't go out on Saturday nights till 4:30 in the morning and then come up and go to Mass. Okay, that's another factor. You're a weirdo. If you really go to Mass in a college environment, you're a weirdo, all right? So that takes a lot of social strength. I think the fact that they start to get this quasi-intellectual approach to life, yeah, you know, this religion thing, that's good for my grandma, but, you know, she had a 7th grade education. I'm kind of educated now, and, you know, evolution says, and the Big Bang Theory says, there's a lot of that kicks in.
Right.
They know just enough to be stupid.
This was one I thought was interesting. Now, if you decide to let him decide about going to Mass, consider, will your decision be for your son alone, or will the younger siblings be watching? Will they conclude that core family standards relax with age?
You got younger kids, it always affects everything. You can't simply say, new standard, you're 19, this is the way we do it. You can live here, but you really don't have to follow our morals and expectations. Now, you younger kids do, because you're still little. Right. That creeps into their mindset and basically says, oh, I only just bide my time.
Right, and even the effect I would think you see is that the ones who are younger by a couple of years don't really see the big difference in age and start to say, just like, well, so-and-so's staying up that late, why can't I stay up that late, or why can't I do that as well?
Absolutely. There's, you know, we had 10 kids, and they were all very close together in age. The only time we essentially said nobody could go to Mass was when you're out on your own. At that point, they make their decision. We can't do anything about it. And that, by the way, Doug, is the biggest problem in this book, by far.
Which part?
My children have left the faith.
Right.
I'm a failure. I'm looking back, and I didn't do the spiritually correct things. Something was wrong with my upbringing of my children. That I cannot tell you how many parents beat themselves up over that.
Right, and that's why I think with these things is that, like you said, I mean, in a lot of cases, you can only do what you can do. You do the right things, you do, as the church sees it, do the best you can, but everybody has a free will.
Free will, and the culture is far more toxic than most parents realize. Right. It is seductive. It takes a child and says, here, come follow me. I will show you how much more pleasure and fun and hedonism and materialism there is over here. And they look at mom, especially when they're in vulnerable early 20s, they look at mom or dad and go, yeah, well, okay, that was their thing. It's certainly not mine. And because of that, this is not 100 years ago, Doug, when there was a farm sitting right here.
Yeah, you talk about that kind of like where if you lived on the farm and you lived in this town, then everybody in the town went to the church.
That was your social glue, yeah. That glue's not there.
Or even in the old days with the Catholic parish system where, you know, people lived inside a small area with the parish and everybody knew everybody, and there was that whole social pressure to conform in a sense. Now we live in a world that's really conformed by peer pressure, right?
Exactly, powerfully so.
And this was interesting too. You said that one survey found that up to 80% of those taken to church as children attend church in adulthood.
Eventually.
Right, okay. And that's the point you make here too, which I think is really good, is the idea of understanding that, and it strikes me, I think I've seen it as well, what viewing habits for EWTN and things like that, is that there's this period of time, well today, you know, a lot of young people don't watch TV anyway, but the idea is that they kind of drift away many times during those 20s and things.
I did.
When they get married and have kids, well, I kind of was, I defected in place. I was still showing up, but I wasn't listening very closely. And if I didn't have the lovely girl who I was dating who wanted to go to Mass every Sunday, I probably wouldn't have gone. She shaped up your wretched soul. That's right. She dragged me along. And who knows what I heard while I was standing there thinking about, is this the fastest Mass we could have gone to? I mean, that's what you used to look for. Saturday night, let's see, Father Willie, he does the Mass in about
35 minutes.
35 minutes. So that's a good one, you know, exactly. And what about this one? And it just fits right into us. My husband is a good father, but seldom attends Mass. And isn't it really, really important that dads realize that in some ways that their presence in church is even more important?
You know that stat you just read, the 80%? If only dad takes the kids to Mass, it stays roughly at 80%. If only mom, it drops to 50. So apparently our Lord knew what he was talking about when he says he wants the males to assume a leadership role spiritually in the house. My wife calls me out. She says I'm the spiritual headache of the household.
You also talked about, and this is real life stuff, you're talking about my wife divorced me 3 years ago, etc., the custody and questions of faith being, and the point with Father saying, the saying is, mothers make boys, fathers make men.
Dads will say to me, I take my kids to Mass when I have visitation on the weekends. My wife does not. My wife does not have much religious pull. Will anything I do make any difference? And I say, you've got to expose them. And the fact that you're the dad gives you a lot more leverage. Because, like we said, the surveys show, the dad's doing it. There's something about a dad doing it. And you got to tell this to the guys. Most of us guys sit back and let our wives do the spiritual stuff. You know, we go along. You got to take the lead. And even if it's only on the weekends, tell the dads, you at least gave them an alternative to look at when they get older.
Right, that's a good point. The way we were, I thought this is another one that people struggle with, the new person in the old past. And through my late teens and 20s, I lived a far from moral life. You know, what should I tell the kids, etc., that kind of thing. And you say this, and this on its own would jump out. Complete openness in any relationship is seldom wise.
Devastating. What do you want to?
Aren't you supposed to be totally open and sharing everything?
Okay, so I go to confession and I tell the priest, you know, well, I've looked at a woman wrongly, and then I want to tell my wife, honey, I want you to know that while we were out last night, I was looking at a woman wrongly. Right. No, you got to show some judgment here on what you confess, if you will. If my kids know that when I was in my teens and 20s, I acted in ways that I would kill them for acting, okay, that's enough. They don't need to know the ugly, nitty-gritty details of how wretched Pop may have behaved.
Right, you could say something like, yes, I did things I shouldn't have and wish now I hadn't. For sure, I was younger and dumber. My past is probably why I'm a parent, why I am the parent I am today with you kids. And again, a lot of that is to say, well, I made some mistakes and I did some things and I learned from those mistakes. And part of my job as a parent is to pass along my own education and experience just like my parents did for me.
I saw what happened to me. I don't want it to happen to you.
Or saw what happened to some of my friends.
Yes.
Might have been a little even further down the road than I was. There's one, so did you. How do I respond to an adolescent boy who, upon having social limits put on him, accuses you did worse when you were my age? And again, that's that thing. That they remember, though, that what you can and will be held against you. And that's the thing, too. A lot of times people are put on in that guilt, like you said, especially parents maybe who came out of the 60s and 70s and stuff like that, where it's like this idea, well, where do I get the moral authority? And it seems like it goes into society in general, that unless you're perfect, you can't tell anybody anything.
That's right.
Because after all, you weren't perfect either.
The church in her wisdom wrestled with that question. You know that, Doug, right? Do the priests have to be in the state of grace to confect the sacraments? The church says no. It's the same thing with parents. You don't have to. Your moral authority is God ordained. You've got it. It's a gift. It's given to you. It isn't predicated upon how great a guy I am. Now, that said, if I don't try to live as I'm teaching, I'm going to have a rougher time of it because the kids are going to zoom right in on the hypocrisy of it all.
Here was one that said, relevant here is the adage I once heard, a foolish person doesn't learn from his mistakes. A smart person learns from his mistakes. A really smart person learns from the mistakes of others.
Yes. Yes, if I can look around me and say, ooh, I don't want to go there. I saw what happened to him. Okay. We have this nutty notion in our society that unless you have experienced my sin, done it in the foolish way I've done it, you can't advise me. And I say that to my clients. I say, okay, let me see. I don't think I've ever been in trouble with the law. I'm married to the same woman. I'm not a woman. I'm not an octogenarian. I've never had drug or alcohol problems. Who could I see?
That's right. Yeah.
Middle-aged guys with a bunch of kids.
That's a good point, right. Now let me ask this question. Is it true that you no longer need a teleprompter even for the Apostles' Creed?
Me?
Yes, that's what it says there.
Well, that must be the one where I kind of...
In the new old wife question.
You've touched a point there, Doug, and this is huge in marriages. One spouse starts to pull away from the other in embracing of the faith.
Gets more spiritual and gets more...
And the spouse, and it's mostly guys, are threatened by it. This is not the woman I married. Okay, now half the time she's got EWTN on. Right. And half the time she's talking to her church friends. You know, we used to do things together. Now she won't even watch that on TV with me.
Right.
What's going on?
We used to watch the football games.
Yes. Now she doesn't like the commercials.
Right.
You know, and now she won't let my son sit in there with me because she doesn't like what's going on. This is a major source of friction. I tell the spouses, the only way you're going to win your spouse over to your newfound faith and maybe pull them along is that you have to show them, because of your faith, you're much nicer to live with. You're more forgiving, you're more tolerant. Part of the problem, Doug, and I always say this, I can pray a rosary a lot easier than I can forgive my mother-in-law. So what we tend to do when we embrace the Catholic faith, right away, quick, we move into the Catholic stuff, which is good, but it's the easier stuff. Getting along with my spouse is much tougher. That's where you got to put your energy.
And that's really where your charity comes into as well, which is it begins at home and dealing with, and maybe in that situation, because you point out your spouse may not so much be threatened by your new life, he may believe that your old life with him is passing away. As he feels left out of your world, he may resent this kind of new world. And so it may be just the idea that, like you said, maybe that means you go out of your way other times in other situations which are not problematic for your faith to participate with him or watch something that he may want to watch on television.
She's got this new guy she's hanging around with, this Christ guy. You know, he's kind of taken my place in her affections, which is as it should be, but at the same time, it's a real threat. Guys sometimes are slower to come to the faith.
So there's another one. This is one that I can personally say we sort of experienced at one time. It's beyond the 3 R's. You know, 5th grade daughter's health class, upcoming week, section on sexual education. I looked at the material. It's very explicit, especially for a 10-year-old. It also presents a moral perspective far different from our own. What do we do? And I know one of the things I always talk about that, I saw that rolled out to from teachers to a set of parents. And I could tell that if they could take a private vote, they would have voted against it. But the peer pressure put on by the school and the people looking around and nobody wanting to opt out for themselves, let alone for their kid, to be ostracized.
The experts are explaining it to the Neanderthals.
Right. Now, what are the 3 S's? Safe sex, save the earth, and say no to drugs?
Yeah, those are the 3
Are those
S's.
yours? Or
some decades ago, education decided they've got to shape the whole person. Unfortunately, in shaping the whole person, somebody has to decide what is a whole person. And with the secular ideas now regnant in our culture, the schools are, in large part, even though teachers as a group are more traditional and conservative, the mindset in the schools, the theories is, well, we have to teach them this new way of looking at life. And this new way of looking at life clashes with traditional morality and traditional religion, and you're absolutely correct. That's what happens. Parents find themselves saying, oh my, if I pull him out of that class, I don't think he needs to know that when he's 6. If I pull him out of there, he's the only one leaving class. He's gone down to the library. The kids are going to make fun of him. He's the weirdo. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Again, the pressure's put to conform into this new way. And what about teachable moments? We hear about teachable moments, and I think there are things where something went wrong and you want to show how it could have been done right. But this idea that you should watch, morally borderline TV shows because it gives you teachable moments, that doesn't even sound right to me.
Teachable moment is usually when something occurs that you then try to instruct with it. You don't allow a bunch of junk, morally speaking, so that you can then use it to teach. I'm not going to let my kid watch the most rot gut channel on TV and then say, come on, son, we'll sit down and I'll share with you how this doesn't fit with our moral system.
Right, so you shouldn't be watching it anymore.
Shouldn't be watching it anyway, because as a kid, you can't assess that stuff. You can't do it at all. I think teachable moments goes back to what you and I talked about earlier, which is it's a justification. I'm too lazy to supervise that stuff.
So I have to rationalize.
I'll rationalize by saying, yeah, I'll explain it to
because I don't want to have to deal with it.
Exactly.
One other thing, just before we go, I know the other one I would think would hit you is it talks about the number of, Catholic families or families out there who are having a large number of kids getting it in the neck, even from other Catholics.
We live in a culture that says any kind of sexual activity is okay, except having babies in marriage.
Right.
You got your 2. Okay, you got your boy and girl, right? Okay, well, you're done now.
Then you're covered.
You're good.
You're covered.
And you're allowed to have 3 if the rule is the first 2 were boys or the first 2 were girls.
Right,
so you're trying to get your girl, right?
Yeah.
It stuns me. Absolutely stuns me as a shrink, as a father, the grief that mothers get, particularly mothers, because they've had more than 2.16 children. I don't know how this happened, Doug. I don't know how the culture automatically said this is not only is this foolish, but it's actually almost immoral to have 3, 4, 5, 6 kids.
Right, exactly. And well, because the environment's more important than anything else.
You're sucking up the rainforest.
That's right. Yeah, too much carbon credits are required for your footprint.
With my boys, it's methane.
Yeah, methane. Okay, there you go. That's a problem too. Just to ask you before we go, another book in the works?
Yes.
What would that be? Could you?
Advice Worth Ignoring.
Okay, good.
Coming out. It's going to be the popular stuff.
Is this an autobiography or something? Maybe.
Yeah, people are going to look at it and go, well, "Why should I buy this book?" I mean,
I got to just ignore this. Thank you so much,
Doug,
Doctor.
always a
great.
pleasure. Thank you.
Great TV show. Keep up the great work on radio. Dr. Ray Guarendi, the one and only When Faith Causes Family Friction. Dr. Ray tackles the tough questions by servant. Available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Parents, you need to pick this up. I'm Doug Keck. Join us next time right here on Bookmark.